Creamer Media's Mining Weekly is interviewing Henk de Hoop, the CEO of SFA Oxford. Henk, it's great to speak to you again. What, in your view, should be the biggest takeaway from this year's SFA Oxford Platinum Lectures?
This year's Platinum Lectures were focused on the hydrogen economy and various aspects of that. And I think, firstly, it's the sheer scale of the momentum. It's very broad-based. It's diving into all areas of the hydrogen economy, well beyond electrolyzers and fuel cells. And secondly, it is still very uncertain in what that would translate to for PGM demand. It is obviously positive, but the sheer scale of that momentum is as yet difficult to translate into actual PGM numbers. And we are doing at the moment a big project on trying to get some clarity on that. But I think that was for me the most interesting one: momentum and the uncertainty on what that would mean for the PGM industry.
So SFA Oxford's 50-page platinum standard says it's high time for hydrogen. What opportunities does the hydrogen economy present for platinum group metals?
The interesting part, I think, Martin, is that it is actually very broad and varied, well beyond the, I guess, standard approach of electrolyzers and fuel cells. Fuel cells, in principle, is obviously good for particularly platinum demand, and it gives the volume, because the hope is that fuel cells will still get to play quite an important role in heavy-duty transport, and perhaps a slightly smaller role in light-duty transport, simply because the battery vehicle has got a head start there and is a technology that actually works well in 95% of the cases. But there are lots of processes required to make a broad-based hydrogen economy happening, and a lot of it is in catalysis and, for example, the production of ammonia. There is a range of catalysts required along the chemical value chain to introduce green hydrogen in a variety of systems. And I think once we dive into that detail and we see a role for palladium, for example, we see a broader role for platinum, we see the iridium demand take up, ruthenium in particular as well. I think once we get clarity which of the technologies are most likely to win, you'll probably see quite an exciting picture emerging for the PGMs.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. And, you know, there are gaps. They talk about the iridium gap. Are there going to be supply gaps? What signs are there that say the iridium gap, to start with, for the hydrogen ramp-up can be closed?
Yeah, that was probably the most important conclusion, I think, from an iridium perspective. We had three companies presenting on iridium, and their efforts in thrifting iridium down to a level whereby we can actually ramp up PEM electrolyzer capacity. The world's order book for PEM electrolyzers is growing very fast, and to the extent that some of these manufacturers have become worried about, can we get enough iridium to make these ramp-ups happen? And what is very important for the PGM industry as well, and the participants in that value chain, to make sure that the confidence is there to commit to PEM technology as part of the electrolyzer solutions. There's obviously a variety of electrolyzer options available. These three companies made it quite clear that their own efforts in thrifting are making great headway. In a sense, we're talking up to 80% less metal to be used. And in principle, at first sight, it doesn't look like that's positive for PGMs. It is actually very positive, because we're not making money out of iridium to the same extent as platinum as a PGM producer. So we need the iridium to make sure that the hydrogen becomes affordable, available, and widely usable in order to use the technologies that consume the platinum, which is actually the sustainable metal for the PGM industry in South Africa. That needs to eventually pull the cart. And I think the comfort everybody is trying to give the producers that are scaling up electrolyzers: we are thrifting, recycling will happen, and effective recycling systems will be in place, so we can get actually the gigawatts on the ground that is required to make that hydrogen widely available.
And Henk, what new fields are emerging that require the catalysis that platinum group metals are able to provide?
There's a wide range of industries that are being, I would say, developed and ramped up, that are requiring quite big scale production volumes. For example, the production of ammonia or methanol or e-fuels. And in a variety of these applications, catalysis is required from the PGM side. And as that ramps up in coexistence with other PGM consuming industries in the hydrogen fuel cell sector, we expect those new sectors of demand to actually become more and more important for PGMs. And the reason why, particularly for palladium and to a lesser extent, I guess, rhodium, because there are not too many obvious new applications there are required, is that what was also clear from Platinum Week is people are taking the threat from EV penetration a lot more seriously. Some of the catalyst manufacturers are starting to develop their own business initiatives in the hydrogen economy to actually offset some of the maturation of their own exhaust catalyst businesses. And because of that reality starting to sink in, it's also clear we need to find new markets for palladium and rhodium. And having these new applications emerging is actually the right news that we need. We just now need to get a good handle on what is the scale of that potential new demand for palladium that can emerge. And for rhodium, although for rhodium it's probably less clear at this stage than it is for palladium.
And what role can platinum group metal catalysis play when it comes to drug production and pharmaceutical medications?
Yeah, we had a great presentation from Heraeus at the SFA day as well. And they've indicated that following the COVID pandemic, it was clear that having fast and scalable methods to scale up active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, is becoming increasingly important for governments around the world. And it's a great business opportunity as well. And PGMs can play a role in it. So it was talking not only about the consumption of PGMs in the medication itself, but also providing the catalysis effectiveness to actually produce these medicines fast and at scale and economically. So I think it's, in a way, exciting. We shouldn't forget, though, that the timelines to get new medicines on the markets are, in principle, normally quite long from a testing perspective. COVID was obviously emergency. Things were pushed through the system a lot faster. But at the same time, the actual volume of PGMs consumed in those applications are not really going to change the future direction. That will very much have to come from the hydrogen economy rather than some of these niche applications. They help and they are great, but they're not necessarily going to change the economics of producing PGMs.
And what should be done to improve the supply of platinum group metals by stepping up the recycling of the metals?
I think there were a couple of sessions where this was highlighted. First of all, PGMs are very recyclable in the first place. There are processes where some of the PGMs get lost, but for example, the exhaust catalysts collection systems are working already very efficiently. There's value in them. There's an economic process that is followed through the chain globally. There's a lot of trade in it. And although there will be further improvements to a certain extent, it probably won't be much beyond the current recycling systems already in place. However, there are also already a lot of companies thinking, okay, what will these future applications consume and how can we recycle this? Because recycling is getting a boost twofold. First of all, it is the concern about PGMs coming from risky destinations. And to be fair, that is now considered South Africa and Russia. And secondly, circularity is important from an environmental perspective. CO2 emissions from recycled PGMs are radically lower, more than 95% lower than from freshly mined PGMs. So there's a lot of focus on getting recycled ounces. And there's already one car maker, for example, that said we actually only by 2030 want only recycled PGMs in our car exhaust systems. It helps to bring the overall CO2 emissions down from the materials you consume per car. And I think it's a very logical and sensible way of approaching it. So we see a lot of activity and actually companies wanting to enter the recycling chain. It's already quite busy, to be honest, in the catalyst side for the exhaust business. And even in the oil refining business, there's a lot of closed loops already in place. But there's still companies wanting to enter to secure metal for their future operations as well.
And what more should be done to attract the policy support of governments to help the global surge of interest in the hydrogen sector?
I think we already seen a major boost when the US IRA Act was announced. There is a straight subsidy on the production of hydrogen, $3 a kilo, that actually brings a lot of the economics forward on the hydrogen development chain in the US, for example. Europe is not staying behind. They already had quite a few incentives in play. They are now accelerating that further with the European Green Deal. And you can already see China as well, having it as one of the focus area, developing the hydrogen economy. So although obviously one can do even more, we shouldn't forget that the incentives that are now in place are far, far further than what they've ever been. So if you look at the momentum that is building, there's an estimate that APV provided. I think it's coming from the Hydrogen Council. It is about $500 billion to be spent by 2030 on hydrogen economy initiatives. So there's a lot of momentum that was never there before. Governments are helping. Can they do more? Obviously, but we shouldn't forget that the effort that has gone in already is very substantial compared to the past.
And I'm hearing a lot about liquid organic hydrogen carriers. You see it on LinkedIn. And could the application of liquid organic hydrogen carriers, or LOHC, result in an oil-like hydrogen being transported and traded around the world in the same way as oil is today and using oil infrastructure?
I think that's why people are excited about that particular technology. I think it is also important to keep in mind that there's a range of technologies and chemicals being thought of and being considered for future transport of hydrogen around the world. The reason why we need to transport it is hydrogen only gets cheap when you use cheap electricity, cheap green electricity. That is not available everywhere. There's not enough either space, sunshine, wind, and being able to transport hydrogen from a place where these metrics are very good, and as a result, cheap hydrogen can be produced, needs then the hydrogen to be transported somewhere else. That technology is one of the technologies. One of the other technologies being used or considered is ammonia transport, is methanol transport, is methane, called green methane transport. So there's a range of other technologies that make use of existing infrastructure in the hope of being able to transport that. And even some of the considerations being considered is, can we not rather use that hydrogen at the spot where it's produced, put it in steel, and then transport it in a very high, dense way, but putting green steel in the market from the place where it's manufactured? So it is probably one of the solutions that's coming. It is not the only one, and there will be a range of solutions. Eventually, economics will win the day, and all considered solutions have different economics and efficiency of using green electricity in converting that into something that the world needs. So I think the winning technology hasn't been determined. It is, however, considered one of the very strong options out there.
And is there anything else we should mention that came up quite strongly at the SFA Oxford lectures?
The important part, I think, for me is that also the industry, as we are becoming more and more aware of the damage that EVs long-term will do to our traditional demand. Remember, platinum 40% exposed to the car industry, palladium about 80%, and rhodium about 85%. So those are very, very important applications for the South African industry. We also need to start working very hard on what are the alternatives. If those fall away, getting new applications used takes years and years of development and scaling up. And we need to be, as an industry, very well aware that there needs to be a joint effort in making this happen and existing and providing information as much as we can. And most of the companies have initiatives already in place. And I think it's a very wise way of spending your money. The markets need to be developed in PGMs. And I think that was clear. There's a lot of momentum building in the hydrogen economy options that we're seeing. But there are a variety of other options where we could see, for example, PGMs re-entering applications where we've lost these PGMs because of past price behavior. If palladium eventually becomes cheaper, for example, we should have a look at what other alternatives can we actually use this metal for. It's a fantastic metal at the right price point. We need volumes to be consumed again in certain industries that might have used it in the past.
That was Creamer Media's Mining Weekly, speaking to Henk de Hoop, the CEO of SFA Oxford.